Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I'm Matt.
I'm Luka.
I'm Ochi.
Hey, Ochi, what's going on?
Not too much. How about you guys?
You know, just chilling, pondering orbs.
Man, I don't know that meme. You just told me about it like 20 minutes
ago. Yeah. We're the Lords of Lore. We're here to talk about some nerdy fantasy and sci-fi related things. We are without Will today, but Will will be back. Or I guess by the time people are seeing this, Will was there for our Wheel of Time review. But yeah, we do reviews of Wheel of Time. You can catch them every Saturday morning or afternoon, depending on our recording circumstance. And and this comes out every Tuesday. So let's get straight into it. We are doing our own little segments here, and we'll start with Luka's Litany of Literature, wherein Luka has a podcast and the podcast talks a little bit what's going on in his life. So what do you got for today?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't renamed this yet, so we will. That is.
And I like doing that little intro.
Yeah, I know. I've noticed. That is a TBD.
Hey, sorry. Did you guys ever watch VeggieTales?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
that's how that was inspired. You know, silly songs with Larry, where Larry comes out and sings a silly song. Anyways, go ahead.
I never put those together. Okay, so my topic of the day will be. I wanted to talk about what makes a great sci-fi or fantasy story, or just a story in general. And the reason I wanted to talk about it was obviously because of Dune, which I've been talking about nonstop. And it's like, what makes Dune so good? Like, what elevates it to that level where it's like, this is the best movie I've seen in like 3 years, or like since Blade Runner came out, pretty much. Like the best sci-fi movie, hands down.
I have a quick answer for you.
Cool.
It's Denis Villeneuve.
I mean,
doesn't miss.
That'll do it for us here on the Lords of Lore.
Good night. But like, seriously, what makes like a movie memorable? Like, what is it that makes a story like stay in your mind? It doesn't have to be. It could be anime, manga, like manga. My bad. It can be like any type of story, a book, a show. Like Ochi, we loved the first season of
True Detective.
True Detective, yeah.
Yep.
It's like none of these stories are connected, but like they have some similarities that just like stick with you. Matt, before we started, I was talking about like it's probably like the fact that there's heavy stakes, and not only that there's stakes, but that they show you that you can like lose in these situations. Because like that's one, like Lord of the Rings, for example. I love Lord of the Rings with all my heart. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I see it once a year, extended edition, 18 hours of film. I've seen the bonus features, like 30 hours of content.
Yep.
But like it has massive stakes, but you don't really ever see the consequences of what could happen if you lose.
Yeah.
I feel like that's another issue I have. I mean, there is a little bit, there's like moments. There's like the scene in the looking mirror and with Galadriel where like you see the potential consequences and that stuff. There's like some character deaths, but like that's one thing that made Game of Thrones so iconic was like nobody's safe until season 8. And everybody's safe.
Yeah.
Or like what are those moments that like happen when you guys are like, this is a great story. Like this is now a great story or a great movie or something. Like you think of any moments?
I don't moments I'd have to think about. I'll come back to that, but I think like we've talked about this before when I was talking about fantasy movies that are set in modern times and have like this hidden world aspect. Usually I'm not a fan of and you gave me the revelation that's because I enjoy world building so much that when you take such a large chunk of the world building out, like I'm less interested because then it's just like power fantasy opposed to, world fantasy. So I think with sci-fi and with just what makes entertaining or like memorable entertainment is not just that it has stakes. Cause like, even like we talked about last week on like some of the reasons why you think Marvel movies are, mediocre is because like they retread that same ground. So even something like a Marvel movie I didn't like Age of Ultron, where like the stakes are pretty high. Like we're dealing with like the end of the world, and even to the point where they get the stakes when they win is still not really great. So there are consequences, but you still, I think it's what you said, like you don't feel like there's a possibility that they might lose.
Mhm.
And even the character deaths that do happen are not so, monumental that you really take them with you kind of thing.
Yeah.
They just feel like moments that the studio or the writers put in because it was like, we have to meet these things on the checklist.
Mhm.
Whereas I think with Dune, you look at like the whole third act of that movie, or I think maybe even the beginning of the third act where, they're attacked and they fucking lose hard.
Mhm.
Like almost everyone that we know so far is gone. I was reading the book, and I think I told you about this off screen last week, Luka. There's a quote in the book. It's just like a quote from a retrospective look at the story of Dune. It's like sayings of the Muad'Dib, and it's like one of the worst things in life, I'm paraphrasing, is realizing that your father is flesh and bone and human. And like, I think like that's what gives it an impact, because the director takes the time to build the relationships between characters, that when you lose people in the story, even though their roles are small, we know what they mean to the characters that are still around. And so you feel the loss. Whereas
Mhm.
sometimes with like, some Marvel movies or even lesser entertainment, it's just like this character X needs to die so character Y feels, emotion X. And when you don't really feel the connection is genuine, I feel like it makes it less entertaining or less memorable.
Yeah, totally. Like that's one of my biggest gripes with Marvel. And I think Ochi, we've talked about this too, where like Marvel movies are all good, but none of them are like that top tier. Like
Yeah.
like the most impactful moment that I remember is like when I watched Infinity War. Like the first time where there was like major stakes and consequences. But like that's why I was ripping on Marvel so hard last week. It just like I need those moments. Like I need, even Iron Man dying was like, it was a big moment, but I guess something feels lacking in
That
all
didn't
of
hit
that.
you like that?
I mean, it didn't. It really didn't. You know, like maybe
No,
I need
no.
to rewatch it. Maybe I need to
No,
rewatch it.
no, I only ask because like you always hear the stories. Like I've heard so many people in passing who are like, yo, I cried in the theater. The people next to me cried in the theater. And it's not, yo, I get it. He was number one. He was the first movie. He was in the trenches when he built that first suit. Did I cry? No.
I didn't cry either, but I think like the character loss was tough. But I feel like almost there's, because the Marvel movies are so popular, there's almost like you're sad to see the actor leave because the actor's entertaining, and not so much that Tony Stark was like I think he's a great character, but like I don't know, like the character loss didn't hit me as hard as I think it hit other people. Like Ochi, you and I have a good buddy who cried for a week, like and went and saw the movie multiple times and cried multiple times, and like oh yeah, I'm not gonna dox this person because maybe they don't want me to say that, but like I remember receiving Snapchats of them bawling, and I'm like, damn, like
No. Oh,
nice.
wait. Do you mean every time he saw?
Yeah,
they saw it, they cried.
yeah.
Word.
Like I think it's great that they would have that sort of effect on somebody, but
I think for me, it was just, there's so many other ways for that to happen. There's like so many superheroes in that same scene. Like there's so many ways that could have gone. It's like, why did he have to snap?
it's see, I thought that part was well earned.
The thing is, I think both of you have gotten to like the only reason I can think like a movie like Dune stands out over the rest, or like other movies like Dune. And like to me, it's intimacy. Because really, because that kind of like, it elevates the stakes no matter what the scope of the movie is, really. Because if you get those relationships down and you get people caring in that way, and also because it kind of leads arcs, like if you can really if you can really get intimacy and and it works and those relationships work, like that in itself leads your story, or it supports the story in a way that, like, a Marvel movies a lot of the time they have like the story beats, but they don't feel like they're supported by like a legitimate way. It feels like it's there through a montage or something, but it doesn't feel grounded.
Yeah.
So it's that end of the world story every time, you know?
Yeah. So like you see what you're supposed to, I guess. Like you see the relationship that's trying to be like delivered, and you see like those arcs, but like at a certain point for me it feels kind of hollow. But then you get the reinforcement of the fact that there's like 20 or 30 movies, so at a certain point that character is that character. Like they've done this, like that actor's done it like 5-10 times at least.
Yeah.
So like they kind of have the leverage where it doesn't matter. Like,
yeah.
But like,
I sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, but then I was just gonna say, in like a single movie, at least for Dune, it's like it's part 1 right now. Like you don't have that leeway, so it matters more when it's grounded. So like in Dune, you can feel it. Like relationships, they choose where to focus on relationships. Probably like 5 or 6 are really highlighted in the whole movie, but in them, like you can really feel the connection there, and then you can feel the arc through it. You can feel like the love, you can feel the loss, you can feel like the grief, you can feel all the stages, and it means something. And then that puts Dune, you know.
Yeah, I do think like Denis Villeneuve's films all do that same thing, where the relationships are set up in such a way that the sci-fi elements almost take a backseat. Like Arrival, you cry at the end because of like what the woman's been through and like what she says about her experience, not because there was aliens and the missiles were going to destroy the world or whatever the case was. It was like the weight of that film comes from the characters and their relationships to each other, not the stakes. The stakes just sort of make it more interesting and put them in this position. I was going to say too, Luka, I think maybe like part of your like why the Marvel movies feel like mean less to you, in that sort of like the relationships feel like forced or like sudden or stuff like that, is because like you're not like a comic book fan from before. So like you're seeing this movie sort of like coming into it like, you know, with a blank slate. Whereas like I feel like the hardcore like comic book fans come in, and when things are different from how they are in the comic books, they bring with them like certain implications that, you know, make those decisions like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they decided to kill Gwen Stacy in this time, or does that mean this thing is going to happen? And so like the speculation runs rampant, and that's the appeal.
I understand that, but then doesn't that make you kind of a bad filmmaker? Like, shouldn't you be giving me, establishing those connections for me who hasn't seen it, you know? Like, I haven't read the comic. Shouldn't you do the work in the film to establish those relationships, to put the stakes in? Not just be like, oh, you've read this comic. Like, here's Gwen Stacy, here's Spider-Man, here's what's-her-face. And like, here's what happens. You know? Like, shouldn't you put the effort in each movie to like make a good movie every time, not to be thinking of the universe? Like, there's entire Marvel movies that are commercials for other Marvel movies. Like, Age of Ultron is pretty much a trailer for every other Marvel movie. Like, it's literally like...
Age of Ultron's bad, I'll give you that.
It was terrible.
It's not a good movie.
It was garbage, and there was nothing good about it. I hated that movie. Like, it was literally, let's take the same plot of the first Avengers and do it again.
Yeah.
And then let's add a character we can kill to like make it seem kind of like heavy.
Yeah, I think it's like it's tough to weigh, right? I think we talked about this when we spoke about Wheel of Time last week. Is that like, who are you making this for? Are you making it for the book fans? Well, then there's certain things that you're not going to be able to include that they'll already know, so you don't need to include them. But if you're making it for the general audience, you can't skip those things, or you have to change them to a point where they become digestible in the format that you're telling the story. So then you get into a point where, oh, these casual fans really like the show, but the book fans, they don't appreciate the changes we've made. I don't know if Marvel has that same issue because they've appealed to such a wide audience, but I think it's interesting still.
Source material.
Yeah,
they don't adapt a single timeline of a comic book. They can do whatever they want.
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they pull from like different things, but then you don't have to be faithful because this is just another. But I mean, that's a comic book thing in general. Just,
I think my issue with it is they feel like generic action movies with the skin of comic book heroes, you know, like Dune doesn't feel like a generic sci-fi movie. It feels like a story in a science fiction world. Like it feels like a real story being told in the world of science fiction. Whereas a lot of Marvel movies just feel like action stories with superheroes. Like there's no human element to them.
I think that's an interesting point. I don't know if I feel that way about Marvel movies. Like I feel like some Marvel movies are stories that just happen to be about comic book characters, but I can definitely get that action movie feel.
The only movie that I remember being like, wow, this is an interesting like character development was like when Iron Man was dealing with like severe depression and anxiety after he,
which is one of the most maligned Marvel Cinematic Universe movies.
Yeah,
like,
it was
critically slandered.
2 or 3, I don't
Three,
remember.
yeah,
3, and it was.
Nah, it's slander for a reason. Trash ass.
I'm not saying it was a good movie.
I enjoy that film.
Yeah,
you know,
yo.
I think people. The big thing I remember was like the Mandarin being like an issue.
Awful.
Yeah.
I
love that.
That was true garbage.
And he came back in Shang-Chi.
Yo, that's another thing. They can just retrospectively change garbage writing decisions because they keep making these movies and then make it seem like, oh yeah, we thought of this ahead of time. Like, no, you didn't.
No, of course not. Anyway, let's get back into what makes
a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the way, like it's the grounded, it's the emotions. Ochi's right. It's the intimacy you can put into a story. Like what we love in life is relationships with people, and like when you see relationships on screen, that makes you invested, whether you like or hate them. And like whatever happens in the story, if you care about the characters, it makes it a good story, pretty much. Like that's why I'm saying you need to make me care about your character. You can't just introduce me Spider-Man for the 9th time and expect me to care just because he's Spider-Man. Like I need to see the human moments, I need to see the relationship. Like I feel like you can make all these movies so much heavier, and maybe that's what's missing. Like they feel like they're made to be PG-13, and like sometimes you just can't tell a heavy good story in that category.
Yeah, I think like when I go into a Marvel film, I'm usually pleasantly surprised because I go in expecting something that's more towards like the PG-13, and this is like an aspect of my childhood that I'm excited to see on screen, because I didn't think we would, like I never thought we'd get a Black Panther movie, and then seeing it and then being like, you know, happy with how it came out was like a good feeling, I guess. But like going into Dune, I don't have that same bar. I'm expecting this to be a good movie because I've been told this is one of the greatest sci-fi novels of all time. So I go into that with like maybe higher expectations. I mean, Black Panther specifically, my expectations were high because, you know, if they dropped the ball, it would have been pretty bad. But with Dune, I don't know. It feels like even for me, like I didn't walk away from Dune being like, man, I really love the character. Like I want to see what happens. Like I want to see what happens to Paul, but like I wasn't like, oh man, this is my guy, or I really love.
I was writing for the Atreides.
yeah. Like I think if anyone in the whole story, Duke Leto is like the most relatable or human, and everybody else feels like duty bound and sort of robotic in that way. So yeah, I don't know. Like I didn't feel like a connection to Paul in that, like, oh, he's a guy, you know. But the world was so interesting to me, and everything it set up was the point that really got me like into it. Reading the book now, like you sort of get more into the heads of the characters, but I don't know for me if the character work itself, like maybe the relationship, sure, but the character work itself, I don't know if it was like the biggest draw. I think like part of it was like the actors they cast are so good that like, man, I want to see what fucking how he chews this scenery up, just because it's like entertaining to watch them. But I don't know.
I don't know. It's funny when I think back on the movie, like at this point I've seen it so many times, but like every performance is done extremely well as far as the character, I don't know, being who they're meant to be. Like, cause like, okay, starting off with a Paul, like I thought his arc was like, one of the things I saw as a critique was that there wasn't much that happened in the movie, but I thought his arc or his turmoil, I thought it was interesting. Like that's what drawn me most to his character. Like, and then it goes back to intimacy, like, because he's like the central point of so many relationships. But at the end of the day, he's dealing with the fact that he is the central point because he's the Messiah, but the funny thing is like there's moments where he doesn't understand. There's moments where he's doubtful, and there's moments where there's one would even say arrogance, or like he knows, like, and I find they're all at different points of the film, and that to me was super interesting. You're right, Oscar Isaac Leto, like every scene he was in, nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
Like Josh Brolin had the only Marvel joke. Oh, actually, no, it's funny. It's funny. Like that's one of my problems. Marvel, too many jokes.
Wait, are you talking about the wash your ass with sand?
Oh no, like the I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Oh,
like, and
because I was gonna say that's in the book.
but the thing is, fucking Jason Momoa, Duncan, Idaho. There's another little joke there too. So there's levity, but the thing is, those performances, like,
are you talking about the spitting one too?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, no, but that that's grounded. That's grounded.
Yeah,
that's funny, but it's like it's not what Marvel does, where it's like, yo, did you see me? I told a joke. Yo.
Yeah, no, I've always said this, and to me, this is why Lord of the Rings is like 20 years later still like the gold standard of adaptation, is because there's never like a modern moment. There's one I'll get to in a sec, but there's never like a moment where they throw in like modern humor to be like, oh, we're still breaking the fourth wall here. You guys still watching? It's always like everyone who's in the scenes believe the ridiculous shit they're saying. Mm-hmm. Like when you hear Elrond speak, it's like, oh, he really he was there at the beginning of time or whatever the fuck he's saying. Like he just says it with such like, I don't know, like conviction. Yeah, that it's like,
it's funny because it's real. Like,
yes,
not because it's a joke.
Yeah, like comedic relief always takes me out of, like, that's the biggest difference. Matt, you know this, Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings. Like, the comedic relief in the Hobbit is constant, never ending. And it's like, tell me the story. Like, don't give me this jokes for 9-year-olds. Like, just tell me the story you're trying to tell me.
But it's actually funny because like when it's grounded and you have like those like single or like infrequent moments of levity or the jokes, they work. Mm-hmm. Like, because it just builds that intimacy and it builds the relationship. Like, say like when you finally see Duncan at the end of the movie, you know, having to fight, and you already know what's gonna happen. You already saw.
Mhm.
Like you feel a bit more. You laughed with him. Like he wasn't only the warrior.
Yeah.
And it's like in Marvel, yes, you get that, but it's so like force fed to you that it's like,
And just like you get that in like the generic action movies, you know, just like the non-memorable, the expendables of the world, like just
yeah, they'll find a way.
exactly. It's like explosion joke, like
The Michael Bay formula.
exactly. Like just give me a bit more. Like stories that are memorable have weight to them. Like they have weight. Like bad things happen because bad things happen in the world. Like it's a human story. Man, anyway, that is what's missing. And that's why I was saying that's when Matt, when you said we take it for granted that we have the Marvel universe, that's what I'm saying. Maybe we shouldn't take it for granted.
No, we don't.
I think we do.
No, we don't take it for granted. It's good that it exists, but it's not taken for granted.
It's not, and I think it's,
that it exists,
and that's why I said that it's
granted.
like bringing like since they're so popular and since so many studios are trying to copy them, they're just bringing the bar slightly lower.
Yeah, you're right.
Think
yes,
that's their
you're also right.
responsibility.
Yes, because we're getting like the cinematic universes of everything now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but I
think about
mad when fucking
dude,
sweet potato fries became a thing. Every fast food restaurant tried them, but they were bad, so they stopped doing them. But
I know
they still exist, like, and I'm happy they do.
No, but the thing is it's like to the point where like it's you're cheating. Like like there's making a new IP, and then there's really making a new idea. Like
are they milking Marvel Comics? Is that the implication here?
Oh, they're definitely milking them, no question.
I don't even know if they're milking them. Like, if anything, you could still make the amount of Marvel movies if there was still like that budget put into other films. The problem is that share of the pot that goes to Marvel and it doesn't go to other film studios.
My issue with that, though, is that people do not watch indie films and they don't go to those smaller budget films. And I think there needs to be a little bit of ownership on that.
We can still get people to watch Warner Brothers and the other.
Yeah, but they're doing DC and they're doing it terribly.
Yo, no, but that's the thing. Warner Brothers didn't need to do that. They had Nolan. Like they had Tenet. Like why like that's better. Like
but yeah, I mean, this is why I say we take it for granted, right? Just because when you look at it, it's always going to be operating off a business standpoint. Like Denis Villeneuve didn't get to do Dune because they were like, it sounds like it's going to be really good. They said this thing is popular and people will come and see this. So yes, we'll greenlight this first movie for you, and if it does well, you could do the other two. That's the agreement, obviously, right? And so the Marvel, not only are they making billions of dollars, but they're also being enjoyed by the people who are watching them, which you can't say the same thing for things like the DC universe or all these other cinematic universes we're getting. The quality hasn't been there. People don't spend money to go see them.
You're right. But it's like, but it's almost the same thing as Disney, where you're shaping the form, like you're shaping the way movies are going to be made. You're shaping the way movies are going to be written. You're shaping
exactly. That's what you're shaping the future of cinema, and I don't like where it's going. Like I don't like the direction. I don't want everything to try and copy Iron Man.
But I think we're not going to see that continue further than it has now, because when you look at the failures people have been experiencing by trying to copy Marvel's formula, like it doesn't work for everybody. It worked for Marvel, maybe because they were the first ones to it, but it's just not working for other people. So I don't know. Like I definitely understand what you guys are saying. Like, and don't get me wrong, Disney's a monopoly, and monopolies are bad, whatever they do, whether it's entertainment or resources. But I just don't know if like stamping like Marvel is like irresponsible filmmaking because other people will try to copy you.
No. Like I said, like all Marvel movies are good, you know, like they're not bad movies. I mean, some of them are bad movies, but they're not on average bad movies.
Right.
The sevens.
Exactly.
Sevens across the board.
They're just never nines. They're never like the 10 out of 10. They're never the like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Like, this is the best thing I've seen in a year. Like, this is the best movie I've seen since I don't even remember. You know?
And the thing is, they almost, it's not set up that way. Like, you obviously have the big ones, like you have an Infinity War, you have an Endgame, but most of the time, you're right, the movie is a teaser for what comes next. Or at least it feels that way. So you're never like truly gratified. If anything, you want more. So it's like
it's the multiverse issues, the never-ending story. Like that we'll just keep.
I'm telling you, man, you got to watch Loki. I feel
will.
like
I will. I said I'll give it a chance, and I am a man of my word. I will watch it.
Good, bad.
Anyway, that'll end it for my topic on what makes good story.
Yeah, I'm glad we came to a consensus. Okay, so we'll move over to Matt's meanders mumblings. And Ochi, I knew you were coming on the show today, and it reminded me of something Luka said a couple weeks ago, in that we were talking, I can't remember what specifically about, maybe it was Dune, which we'll find any excuse to talk about, but that you are a huge sci-fi fan. Obviously you came on Unabashed, you talked about 2001. You're talking about Dune earlier. I know this to be true, but you're not a huge fantasy fan. I think something like Game of Thrones is probably like the pinnacle of your fantasy enthusiasm. So I want to talk about sci-fi versus fantasy, because I know, like, to me, they're not different at all. I know for Luka, like, you appreciate the differences but find them similar. But I know you, Ochi, you're not a huge fantasy fan, but you're a huge sci-fi fan. So I'm just trying to crack like what you feel are the biggest differences.
Well, for me, I guess like the first thing that pops into my mind is like sci-fi, science, fantasy, magic. Like, and that, to me, that's not a big deal. Like that's not a deal breaker whatsoever. But I do feel like for me, it's like sci-fi might just be better at telling stories that I find more intimate, because sci-fi is easier to be grounded. Yes, it might be the future. Yes, it might be in space, but it's sort of grounded in the idea that it's based in science, like at least to a good degree. And then if it's not something that we see in the present, you can at least extend it over to the future based on like what they're going off of.
Yeah.
With fantasy, it's more so like, what I'm just thinking is that fantasy is more so like a whole new world. World building is a lot more important in terms of making it feel grounded, because if it's trying to be all mythical and really elevated and like it's fantasy elements, it has a job to do that it can't rely on history in that way. It needs its own history, like in a different way, like. And I just don't know. Game of Thrones, yeah, it's pinnacle fantasy for me. And basically the reason I can think why is because of the relationships, the intimacy.
And it's like pretty low magic setting.
Yeah, it doesn't rely on magic, but the elements are there, and they're there from the beginning. Like it's hinted right from the first scene of the show. So it's not like they run around it, but it's just very grounded, and it's not the highlight. Like,
Yeah. Interesting.
Wait, but I got a question for you. What makes fantasy work for you?
Oh, I don't know. Like why am I drawn to it, or why do I think it's a good way to tell stories?
Yeah, I guess more so, why do you think it's a good way to tell a story? Like when you see good fantasy like done in film or TV, like why is it working?
Yeah, I think obviously like it's easy to point out what doesn't work with fantasy, and I think it's a lot of it's just tropism, just things I've seen before that you're not telling new stories. But why I think fantasy works, I've probably said this like 100 times on the show, but it's like you go somewhere else to learn about home. And I think sci-fi, you lose that going somewhere else part of it. It's you're going somewhere else to learn about now. And with fantasy, you're going somewhere else to learn about home. I think that's the difference for me. Again, the difference to me is very small. It's almost entirely aesthetic to me, because in Game of Thrones, you have the dragons and you have in very little circumstances people throwing magic blasts out of their hand, but the dragons serve as a highly destructive weapon that this other faction is scared of you using. I think you can make Game of Thrones the exact same story with all the same plots and turn it into a science fiction story, and it doesn't change or it doesn't lose the things that make it a good story. It's just a different setting.
Like a Cold War drama.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You just like, or like a post-apocalyptic drama where like this woman has 3 tanks, and like everyone's scared of them because like tanks are super powerful and they could destroy our cities or whatever the case, or guns or bombs, or like, it doesn't matter. But the thing about Game of Thrones is it's not interesting because they're dragons. The interesting thing about the dragons is the implications they have on, what they could do or what power they bring this woman. But for me, I like seeing dragons or swords, it's cooler to me. But yeah, what I think makes a good fantasy is the same thing that makes any other good story. And what we talked about earlier is like, it's the characters, it's the relationships, it's the stakes of the story. It's not feeling like it's contrived or like, playing on tropes too much, or not just being of a source material I already enjoy and adapting it or putting it into a different medium. It's like you add something with the medium. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything more than that of why I'm drawn to it. Luka, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I am a sucker for magic. I've always loved magic. So if you put magic in a story, like I'm already partway in. Like I'll hear you out at least.
But magic feels like it can be done badly. Like,
definitely.
But so can sci-fi though.
Absolutely, magic can be
but it's different.
Bad.
Magic, like I feel like when it works, but it's almost like it's so foreign because it's unexplainable that like when it's done well, it's just like whoa,
but
like you're trapped.
But see, that's the thing. Like, and the main thing I think what fantasy adds to stories, like if we're talking about just like a bare bones story that takes place on Earth, like a drama movie, right? Fantasy elevates it because you're adding this element, you're adding magic, or you're adding dragons, or you're adding whatever the case is. And with sci-fi, you're adding a piece of technology, you're adding space colonies. But the thing we care about is those people, right? And so for me, like if you add people's ability to throw fireballs into a story, it's the same thing as adding people's ability to throw fireballs with magic gloves or technologically advanced gloves. Like for me, it's just like, chemical X basically. And I think you can get that same chemical X from either.
You're not
or.
wrong. You're not wrong. At the end of the day, the fireballs just is a different looking bullet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember when I said to Ochi, I was like, man, like sci-fi fantasy are the same genre. And he was like, man.
It's because it's the elements that go into them. It's what they rely on. Like
you're totally right. Where sci-fi is so much more grounded because we're so much closer to the world of sci-fi than we are to the world of fantasy. Like our world today is like probably like a century or two away from some of the sci-fi we've seen, or like some of the sci-fi made in the 80s. Whereas like we're never gonna see a Lord of the Rings type world. I mean, maybe
Don't say that.
No, but and then the thing is, like, I feel like because it's more grounded, it's easier for like multiple people to have different perspective or different viewpoints and like succeed at conveying them. With fantasy, I know there's Lord of the Rings. I guess you could say Harry Potter. I guess The Hobbit falls under Lord of the Rings. I know a lot of people don't mess with the Hobbit films.
I don't know what that is.
I'm okay. Yep, I'm indifferent. So like with sci-fi, there's like you can think of like at least 10 different directors who've done at least like a really good sci-fi movie.
Right.
Because there's multiple movies. So like with fantasy, I know Lord of the Rings, I know Harry Potter. What are the other ones? Who are the other directors who have done like sci-fi well?
But that's like there's no like I can't think of like a good like The Green Knight was a good fantasy movie.
Yeah,
but that was
recent,
also that was low fantasy to begin with, and like that was pulling from King Arthur, which I mean whatever, sure, King Arthur, but like we've gotten so many sci-fi movies, shows, adaptations, and there's none in fantasy. Like we got Game of Thrones, now we finally have the Wheel of Time. There's a Lord of the Rings show that was announced. There's been like a couple books that me and you, Matt, have read that have like sold their movie rights to different studios.
Right. So
there's like potential projects in the works. But like there's no like for good fantasy, you need to read books. Like there's no way to get good fantasy if you're not reading books. It's impossible. Like even Game of Thrones is like it's great, but like that's so low fantasy. Like that doesn't hit the spot for me, for example.
Yeah, I think Wheel of Time is now entering that conversation of being a high fantasy show that's accessible and well done.
Mm-hmm. Like the Witcher show is good.
Yes, it's good, I would say as well.
But like it has flaws. But yeah, there's no like I said, Game of Thrones doesn't hit that spot because it's so low fantasy. Like you said, Matt, you can take Game of Thrones and put it into a sci-fi setting or even a modern day setting, and that story would work.
Right.
Whereas like Lord of the Rings is high fantasy. You can't do the story of Lord of the Rings you could in a sci-fi setting, but it'd be a different feeling. Like for me, like the feeling of fantasy, and I think this is one of the reasons why you, Ochi, don't love fantasy like you love sci-fi, where in sci-fi it's easy to have that weight and like a bit of that sort of it's almost naturally grimdark, because whenever anybody who's alive starts thinking about the way the world is developing and what the future will look like, they're like, wow, it's going to be terrible. like you're going to have like monopolies and corporations, going to be Big Brother. Like that's the vision of the future everybody who writes stories has, like everybody who writes in the genre has. Whereas in fantasy, it's like it's an escape, and there's a lot of that very let's go on an adventure that's fun and light. Like that feeling. A lot of the Lord of the Rings feels like just like an adventure. Like you're just going on an adventure. Whenever you see those shots of them like running around Middle Earth and like the battle scenes, there's just so many things that are just you're just listening to a story that's an adventure. Whereas sci-fi is often very heavy because we're predicting where the future is going, and like we're seeing what's happened, and we see the signs already in our own society of like we're going in that direction. So I think sci-fi naturally just gives you that weight where anybody who's writing a story about is like, yeah, the world's going to be awful in 100 years, like in 1,000 years. Or if humans created space travel, there would be like an emperor with a monopoly on the entire method of travel, which is Dune. Like there's an entire group with like a complete stranglehold on how you travel. Whereas in fantasy, it's like grimdark is only a recent thing in fantasy. Like really, Game of Thrones or like A Song of Ice and Fire was like one of the first genuinely grimdark fantasy books ever written. And like now you have more of them.
I would have thought they came. I would have thought there would have been some link to nursery rhymes or like
tales for sure, like
sense.
Definitely
I would have thought that
folklore.
I would have thought that grim dark was like rooted in there.
I would say like Brothers Grimm is the original grim dark, right? Taking folklore and turning it into horror, basically, for sure. But I think of modern fantasy, like you Luka, being like the medieval European setting, grim dark. I think that's more modern.
But they didn't grow together, because like I imagine, like my thing is, I imagine the writers of those works maybe not being the same person, but being at the same cafe or like or like having conversations. So I can very much imagine, like,
I'm sure there's like a like a wave you could look at where like, okay, we're grimdark again, and now we're whimsical, and grimdark again, and like, here's the Hobbit, and like, but I'm not sure what the timeline is.
Yeah, I did watch George R.R. Martin say like, he did like rely on Lord of the Rings, or that was a heavy inspiration, because like the dude who made Lord of the Rings was like old. Like that's old, So like it's been around for a really long time. So I guess that counts. It even though it's like it counts because it's like the Godfather.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and the Lord of the Rings was written like, I mean, he fought in World War One, like Tolkien. You know, like Lord of the Rings is an old story. I mean, his son died like 3 years ago in his like 90s. You know, like so Lord of the Rings has been around. It's like 100 something. It's like around 100 years old already.
Yeah, The Hobbit was in the 30s, so we're getting pretty close.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, and those are the books that inspired, like that was what allowed epic fantasy to exist.
Right.
So like the next big series that was like worldly popular is The Wheel of Time, which is like literally Robert Jordan, the author, was like, I love the Lord of the Rings. I want to write my own version of it. Like
exactly, yeah.
That's what the Wheel of Time is. And then so many stories came after it in that same vein, until we got A Song of Ice and Fire, which was just heavy grimdark, low fantasy. And then that became popular.
And that brings on things like Malazan and
exactly. That's what inspires Malazan. That's what inspires all of the Joe Abercrombie books, like First Law series and all of that. And now modern fantasy is like a sort of a blend of those. Like the Rage of Dragons, for example, is very high fantasy, and yet it's also pretty dark. Like I don't know if it would fall completely into grimdark, but I mean, it's a lot heavier than what you might expect from like classic fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think those stories lend themselves very well to film, where like those types of stories are becoming popular to see. And like people saw Game of Thrones, they're like, wow, this is like really cool. Like the drama of it is so interesting, of a grimdark fantasy story. So I think like grimdark might be the path into those heavier fantasy stories in film and TV. Even The Witcher has like heavy themes.
Yeah, which I almost feel like I don't mind grimdark fantasy. We've talked about this before, where it's like, I think there's certain projects that lend themselves more to grimdark, but I feel like what you were saying, Luke, is like a lot of sci-fi falls into grimdark because it has to, because it's an approximation of the future, right? It's like so cynical as a genre, because we look at, okay, here's a new forming technology, like Blade Runner, for example. We're able to make people, and like, okay, well, what's the worst fucking thing that could happen? Or we abuse them and they're second-class citizens and they start to rebel. And, and we have a problem with that. Like, that's the worst. Or they wipe us out entirely. Some implications from 2049 type of thing. But even all sci-fi is sort of like, how could this go wrong because of the human condition? How will we as a society take this technology and corrupt it and make it a bad thing when it shouldn't be? Whereas I feel like fantasy can almost more be like an approximation of the past, or flavoring the past or in a certain way. And I think sometimes we throw modern, human tendencies onto fantasy, which may not be accurate, but I don't think that's the point. Like, I don't think fantasy needs to be period piece, like loyal to period piece. Yeah, it's just like an analog. It's more so like fantasy is a world where we didn't need technology. Like, we didn't need technological advancement because we had magic. So this is why the world progressed differently or didn't progress, depending on how you're looking at it. But yeah, I don't know.
I was just gonna ask, is something like that video game Horizon, could that be considered fantasy?
No. I think if somebody went into it and saw like trailers or stuff, like I think the trailers are pretty clear actually that it's like
but it would only be sci-fi. Like, you're not giving it that.
No. I would definitely say it's a sci-fi, but I spoke about this when we did an episode about science fantasy, which is its own subgenre, a combination of the two. But for the characters in the universe and the way the game feels and plays, but you're living through the experience of these characters, it feels like you're in a fantasy game. It feels something more akin to Skyrim. There's these factions, there's these creatures and this evil being, but as the player, you unravel the mystery, and as someone living in the modern age, you can see like all these things are actually technological creations. So it's a sci-fi for the player, but for the characters, it almost more feels like a fantasy game, if that makes sense. And then as the character, as you learn what the world actually is, then you start to peel back that, there's people who worship deities in that world who are just AI. And there's things that happen in the world that are explained as like miracles, but it's just AI that was too slow to process the first time, or, I don't want to spoil the game, but, made events happen because, something in their algorithm told them to, which I think is like the best type of sci-fi, where the line is blurred between what's science and what's myth or religion or magic, because then I guess it makes us question more of like how our society works. And like we're doomed to kill ourselves with AI is basically, we're all sort of sci-fi leads to.
I mean, Dune still has the prophecy and the visions.
But I think that's like my favorite part of Dune, is that similar to what I was saying about Horizon, is like it feels like a fantasy. You have these factions, it's part of an empire. There's Star Wars elements, which I know is controversial because Star Wars is very heavily inspired by Dune and whatnot, but there's all these aspects that make you feel like it's in a fantasy. There's these powers, but when you pull back and like, this prophecy is not a real prophecy. This is something people designed decade by decade, generation by generation, so that they could exploit that later on. It's not like this kid was born with magical abilities. He was bred in a certain way through generations to be able to do the things he does. And so like, it feels like a fantasy. All the elements of a fantasy are there, but it's all because of sci-fi reasons. Even like something like spice being like this very religious thing for one people. Like, you could easily get a explanation in Dune where it's like, oh, it's some sort of psychotropic drug that does this or this or that, or what it's made of lets you grab from this. And I think that's something that would happen in fantasy. Like, spice is something that could be in both fantasy and sci-fi, and in Dune serves both purposes, right? It's a religious thing for one people, and also hyperfuel. So like, I don't know, it's like, I think Dune is like a perfect example of like sci-fi masquerading as fantasy, which is a cool analog because all the fantasy elements in Dune are things that were set up by this scientifically advanced people. Yeah.
Totally. Sorry, I just want to say one of the reasons I think like sci-fi stories tend to be much more human, and fantasy stories tend to be much more faction and group driven. Like, very rarely in a fantasy story do you follow, I mean, maybe that's wrong to say, like one single character like going through a story. I mean, you do, but it always feels somehow like it's probably because of the world building.
You're talking about the elves and the orcs.
Yeah, like you're always having to do world building and like introducing new elements. Like,
yeah,
that's where you lose the sort of human, like the grounded human relationships of it, and that's where it's like difficult to. That's where you lose some people, I think. Like,
I agree. But my argument to that would, like, I don't think you lose the human element there. I think you lose the relatability, which I think those two things can be hand in hand. But
like you lose the audience.
Yeah. But when you're doing a sci-fi, you can have those characters say things about our own world, like, oh, there once was a dictator named blah blah blah, and that's something we as the audience will, oh, they're making reference to so and so or blah blah blah, and we understand that. But I mean, you could take, like, if somebody in a sci-fi says there was once, or like speaking about Napoleon, right? That's something we can understand and contextualize. Like, doesn't matter how far in the future the sci-fi is taking place, we'll know like the implications of what they're saying. But in fantasy, it's just like, let me tell you the story about, change name from Napoleon here in parentheses, like, and it's the same story. He did this and this and that because he had a magic power, not because he was, deranged. Like, and it's the same thing. So yeah, I don't know. I just think for me, it really boils down to aesthetic and setting. But yeah, I think that's a good point, that you lose audience when it's too high fantasy.
Yeah. And that's why Game of Thrones was so popular, because there's so little world building happening. You introduce a couple houses, which is like, just listening to British history pretty much. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, literally. Anyway,
yeah.
Because I have more to say about the differences of fantasy.
Yeah. All this to say, Ochi, you should give some of these bigger fantasy projects, or you should read Rage of Dragons.
I've been telling this guy I've said this at least 20 times to this man. Like, read the Rage of Dragons. I don't read books.
Wait, I actually, now that I'm saying this, I have another bone to pick, because I know you're a big fan of anime, and anime is predominantly fantasy. There's some sci-fi animes I love, but most of it is strictly fantasy. How do you reconcile that then?
Hunter x Hunter?
Fantasy.
You're not wrong. But the thing is, anime does a couple things well. Like, they're really good at relationships and characterization, because the thing about anime is that it does, a lot of the times it can go into tropes, like, at least in terms of building the world at first, and then it like subverts it at some point to, like, really get the story going. But like, it does that really well. You obviously have the visual element is different in the sense that if the art style is done extremely well, and like, let's say like there's fighting and the fights are done extremely well, like that can be a very big selling point in a different way from like a movie or a TV show. Cause like at this point, everyone has a nice like 4K camera. It can look really nice.
Yeah,
but
true.
like,
well, I mean,
like,
CGI though.
Yeah, but even CGI can look really good at a low level, or like at a low budget now, as long as like talented people are doing it. So like, even that is becoming a little bit more like accessible, or like the league average is a little bit better now. Like, but yeah, but as opposed to like the other situation, nah.
So last question here. Do you feel more drawn to fantasy-based animes or sci-fi ones?
I would say I cannot think of a sci-fi that relies on anime. Like, if anything, they would be based in the present day with, if anything, I guess a fantasy element.
One of my favorite sci-fi properties of all time is Gundam. Specifically the Universal Century storyline.
Oh shit.
Going on since 1979. And for me, that's one of the best sci-fi stories, regardless of medium. I think it's humans and why we're fucked up as a people in a repeated cycle. And things are really bad for people everywhere you go, type of thing. Uh, but it's an anime, and it's one of the few sci-fi anime I've actually watched and been like, I didn't realize this would be something I'm into. And then you obviously have things like Evangelion, which some people might have fantasy elements.
I no, that's the thing. When you brought up Gundam, I just realized, sci-fi anime that I love, Evangelion is like I was late to it, so I only found it in like the last 2 years, maybe year and a half.
I haven't even started it. Ochi's recommended it a few times, and I'm like, I should watch it.
That's the thing. It subverts the genre, like, and at the very end of the series too. Like, it's only 26 episodes, and near like the final 4, it just changes tonally. It's not the same show. It's really weird. Like, and it's like it almost becomes a psych exam. Like, in terms of like, I'm serious. And like, it's like a deep dive into, I don't know, existentialism, nihilism. Like, like the whole idea of like nothingness and losing your identity. It's in an anime about kids trying to fight aliens or like in mechs. It's crazy.
Which I think I think that point is lost in when you just say anime to a lot of people. Like Luka, you were saying, that's the like anime for some people, regardless of how much people vouch for it, they're out. They can't do cartoons, which I think is stupid, to be fair. But like, I think like mech, like Gundam sort of didn't kick off the mech genre. It's starts with Astro Boy in like the 30s or 50s or something. And then sort of ramps its way up to Gundam, which is sort of like one of the big tent poles of mecha animes. But Evangelion is like the gold standard. And I think it holds that place in that sort of pantheon because it's like, this was one of the ones that took this genre and, you get people to watch because it's like big giant robots. Everyone's like, I love that. I'm showing up. And then you give them a story that they're not expecting. Again, like you say, Ochi, like subvert. I think even though it is a sci-fi, it's still like the thing that makes that show what it is actually just the characters and the psychological aspect of it. Whereas I feel like a lot of that genre, like the mech genre, is just like, how cool do these robots look?
And no, and it's funny because like there's a point where you realize in Evangelion, this isn't for kids.
Yeah.
It's not. Like, and then like if you watch the movie, if you watch End of Evangelion, and then there's like a bunch of other ones. But if you watch End of Evangelion, you realize, no, this is not for kids. Kids aren't supposed to watch this. but in a certain way, like, that doesn't make it better than other like forms of media or other animes. But in terms of like, it does what it does well. And because it's focused on adult themes, it just hits harder to someone who's a little older. Like, so I don't know if Pokemon's gonna hit like that.
But would something like Attack on Titan or possibly like Naruto or something could still hit those same beats, I think. Maybe not Evangelion levels, to be fair, but like similar themes.
Yeah, I would say Attack on Titan probably attempts to more than Naruto, because Naruto has moments where like, oh, this might not be for kids, but it's still if you're a teen, no problems there. If you're a kid, maybe your parents might be angry, but still I would have watched it. Like, and then you got something else. You got Attack on Titan. Yeah, like it tackles a lot of different ideas or concepts, and then it does have like that severity to it. I don't know if it like tackles like it tackles more so socio-political and like more so cultural and like those type of group problems more so than like, you know, psychological individual, like just like, you know, like those type of emotional problems. So it's different. But it tries to do something there. So it's not bad.
Yeah.
I think a good example of one that sort of explores a bit of the inner turmoil, but is still fantasy, is actually Hunter x Hunter. Like there's a lot of character arcs that are like very heavy internal psychological struggles for characters.
Hunter x Hunter is Hunter x Hunter is a masterclass in story writing. Because it has moments where you feel like it is completely a children's show.
Mm-hmm.
And it has moments where like, I'm not sure this is a kid's show. And there have moments where like, and it has moments where this isn't a kid's show. Like, that's the funny thing. Naruto, I don't feel like has that. Yes, people die and is permanent. But like, yo, Hunter x Hunter, someone gets shot in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Yikes.
You know, there's some heavy scenes. Like it goes from 0 to 100 in like the last couple arcs, you know, like.
Yeah.
Wait, you've seen Hunter x Hunter,
Matt
right?
hasn't seen it.
I haven't. I watched it with you in Montreal a little bit, but that's all I've seen.
Yo. That's what I'm. Okay, then. I feel like that's fair enough. That's not a big spoiler alert, but like, yeah, someone gets shot in the face, which you're not expecting in a show like Hunter x Hunter,
Right?
And it's not one of those like, it's not one of those where the dramatic effect is lost and it's like a cutaway so you don't feel it. They might have cut away at this point. I can't remember, but you're supposed to feel it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very jarring because of the fact that for so long this felt like a kid's show.
Right.
And that exact moment that you're talking about is like that was when I saw it, I was like, what the hell is happening right now?
No.
Like, Matt, it's a must.
Yeah,
right. Masterclass.
The one thing I would be remiss not to mention also is Akira is like a sci-fi as an anime as well.
Yeah. I flopped. No, because and you're right, and that is again. It's weird. I wanted to say masterclass again, but it's a film that relies on ambiguity so much, or like the fact that you need to rewatch it, and it like it's not writing is not the point. It's definitely the experience and what's going on, like, but it does it well. At the same time, once you do rewatch it, you notice that like it's adapted from the manga, which is a lot longer, but like the arcs and the story that it tells is crafted. It's tight and it's tight.
Rose, another great one.
I haven't heard of that. There was one, spoilers. There's this show called Gargantia on the Vendor's Planet, and if we've been friends long enough, I've probably recommended to you, and you probably didn't watch it because what fucking kind of title is that? It was on Netflix, and I scrolled past it. It's legitimately one of the wildest sci-fi things I've ever seen. So if people are watching, check that out because it's fucked. But I've been ranting here about this for a while. Let's throw over to you now, Ochi. What do you got for us today?
Okay, so for a topic, I chose the films or television shows that were most visually striking to you. So basically the ones that stood out to you, like practically only for this reason. They might have been good for other reasons, but that's why they were in your head.
Like they stuck with me visually, or I wanted to watch them visually?
they stuck out to you visually. Like you're like, I don't know. For me, it's very like, it's like very poignant, or like when I notice like a film like all the way through has a certain aesthetic and it does it really well, that's like that's a feat in itself. So it's like, I don't know, like a film that just like,
yeah, I guess for me it would be like, I guess there's three ways to looking at it, right? Like there's the films I watched or the books I read or the games I played solely because I liked the way it looked in trailers or the cover of the book. Like I was like, that looks sweet, I'll buy that. And the aesthetic of the world sort of held up to those expectations. And then there's movies where it's like, I would recommend watching this movie solely based off how cool it looks. And it's also a good movie, but you know, it's a visual spectacle. And yeah, maybe just two, I guess, or movies that were so beautiful that like I want them around me all the time. Like I'll get a print of them and I want the art books and stuff like that. They just look cool and I want to know more about the process of making them. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so yeah, no, like I'm thinking exactly a visual spectacle.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
What do you remember just being like, yo, my eyes, like there's a visual, it's like a visual treat, or like, yeah, it's just it's very eye-catching, or that's what matters. That's what sticks out.
Yeah. So we just finished talking about Akira, but like obviously that's one where like that 90s style of animation just like has a fucking hook in my heart. I don't know what the difference is between like obviously early 2000s there's a switch to like CGI. And before that I still love like 80s animation as well, but there's something about like the late 80s early 90s animation, things like Akira and like I don't know, like Gundam MS 8th MS team, stuff like that. Some of the Spider-Man animated shows that I don't know, and even Dragon Ball Z, like the Trunks arc, like that type of animation, like just literally like me in the chokehold. So anything like that. But I guess the movie that stuck with me the most visually, and like I'm looking up and I have art prints of this on like either side of me. I have the art book just sitting off to the side here. Blade Runner 2049, without a doubt. Roger Deakins, cinematographer. Honestly, like you can watch this movie with the sound off, and you still get the story. Like you might miss obviously the dialogue and stuff like that, but it like visually, there's moments in the movie where the story's being told through visuals, and on top of that, it's being told through CGI visuals in the story. Like you get the giant joy, and that scene is so important to that character's, you know, view of themselves and their decisions moving forward. Everything like that is all because of how beautiful it is.
That's my phone lock screen.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's just such a crucial moment that takes no dialogue. It's just well acted by both Ana de Armas as the synthetic joy in that scene, and then Ryan Gosling. But it's just like how, and the colors and everything about it, that movie, I would just like, I could just throw that movie on and just like watch it without having to hear anything. So that's probably like my number one.
And this is an interesting topic because I never paid attention to directors really until Ochi started listing off one time. Like before Dune even came out, he was like, man, Denis Villeneuve doesn't miss. And here are some movies he made. And every single movie he started like listing off, I was like, wow, like Sicario. I remember Sicario being so visually stunning, like as a movie that was just like cartel versus CIA. Like I thought that would be such like a generic plot, but like visually, like the shot stuck with me. Arrival, Annihilation comes to mind.
Oh yeah, totally.
Should we talk about the scene in Mad Max? In Mad Max Fury Road when the like what's this dude's name? Like the rig is being chased into the sandstorm, and there's that wide shot of the rig going into that like just gigantic like sandstorm with lightning bolts, and like that scene. Like I'll watch that movie just to get to that scene.
That's the meme. Well, there's the two memes of that. This is cinema with Martin Scorsese and Bong Joon-ho. Like that's just chef's kiss. Like not going into the tornado. That when I think of Fury Road, that's the scene I think of, and that's one of the movies that I thought of when I picked the topic.
Mm-hmm. Another scene from Dune. I think I've said this to either one of you or both of you. Duke Leto's final scene, like the scene where we see him at the table, that's a Renaissance painting.
Yeah.
Like that is literally beautiful, like a stunning shot. Like that specifically, there's a bunch in Dune when the Harkonnens are leaving Arrakis, when you see like the planet at the bottom of the planet at the top of the screen and all their like spaceships flying away. Unbelievable shot. I love that shot so much.
Oh no, it's funny because like, okay, so I thought of two main films and then two sleeper films when I thought of the topic. The two main films were Blade Runner, which basically formulated like that was like, I guess like I don't know what you would call it, like goat aesthetic for like the past 4 years or since whatever it came out. Like that was my favorite idea of what like a visual spectacle would be, or like what like my favorite visual world, I guess, that I saw.
Right.
And like, and then the other big one was Dune, because basically when I think back on the movie, like it's weird. Like that's where I realized like it's really high on my favorite movies already, because like there's so many scenes where visually it's a 10 out of 10 to me. It's amazing. Like sometimes it's just the like it was the first movie I actually, aside from Blade Runner, where like it's flying over like one of the like parts of the city and the music's playing, but the music had a part of doing it in like Blade Runner, but in Dune I remember it showed like the location of the Harkonnens, Getty Prime. And I was like, yo, this is just a location shot, but somehow it is awe-inspiring. Like it's just a normal, like it's just a building they're at. It's just like they're just trying to show me where they're at for the next scene. But it's like it hit. Like there were scenes where like they're in the plane before it lands, where it's like, wow, this is beautiful. Like everybody captured in the shot is like the way they're supposed to be, both like emotionally and like physically representing that emotion. Like it's the landscapes, Shai Hulud, like the sandworm, like they were all these moments where visually that might have been the most impressive thing, despite everything else that's going on.
Man, I just remember the scene when they're first arriving at Arrakis. I don't know if you guys remember the scene where there's like their ships are coming down. They're all like vertical ships, but like somehow the spacing of the shot, like as the ships are further away, like they're smaller, and like they're like on a diagonal shot, like coming towards you, and they're like bigger and bigger. I don't like. There's so many scenes that are just like, oh, you said, Ochi, just 10 out of 10 visually, and like it's like such stunning moments. Like I've been trying to think of like another movie that's like that, but I keep thinking of like Arrival, Blade Runner, Dune. Like,
yeah, no, and with Dune it's weird because like yes, there are films that have hit me in that way, even Blade Runner, but with Dune it's like absolutely everything, and it's like even things that shouldn't, like a corridor or like people, like a conversation in a hallway shouldn't mean that much visually, or it shouldn't be that good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then the other two, like the sleepers, were Fury Road, because like it's a movie that does not rely on like dialogue at all. It's just visuals. and like it's beautiful and it's like consistent. Like it's the only film that looks that way, kind of, but it does it so well, like it can't be mimicked. And then the sleeper, I don't even know if you guys have seen it, is Ad Astra.
I love that movie.
Like
I heard bad things.
Yeah,
when it came out,
the Brad Pitt in space. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
the thing is, it's literally Apocalypse Now in space. Like it's literally beat for beat. Instead of going to see a commander in like, I forget where Apocalypse Now is, and I don't want to say the wrong place, so I'm just not gonna. Oh my God, it's Vietnam. It's the Vietnam War, dog. Like, no, because I remember that it wasn't shot in Vietnam.
Right.
So like, yeah. So yeah, like, damn, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, Ad Astra's Apocalypse Now in space.
Yeah. It was literally Apocalypse Now in space. And like the only difference is like with Apocalypse Now, he was going to see a commander in Vietnam. And in Ad Astra, Brad Pitt's going to see his dad in like space by Jupiter or some shit.
Was it Jupiter? It doesn't matter.
I can't remember. It's far. It's farther than Mars.
You're right. Like, no, I loved that movie. And I remember I saw it in theaters, and I remember like coming out and like seeing reviews, and it was like not doing well. Like it didn't make a lot of money. Like it wasn't reviewed super highly. And I was like, why? Like, I really, really like that movie. And you're right. It was super, super visual. There was not a lot of dialogue in it. And even the dialogue that there was like very subdued. It wasn't like a super dramatic performance from Brad Pitt. It was like, the range of acting was like very small for him. It totally relied on like the feeling and the visuals giving you this like intense sense of loneliness while you're in space. Like I remember feeling isolated while he was like when you see those like shots of just like the massive expanse of space and just like him in a spaceship by himself for like weeks and weeks. No, that was a great, great visual movie. Completely forgot about it.
I've been thinking of a few while you guys have been talking about Ad Astra. Okay, but it's just funny because Dune, which obviously cinematography out of this world, but the other film I was thinking of that like, Luka, I don't know how you'll feel about this, that I love the cinematography for Star Wars Rogue One. And Greg Fraser, who did the cinematography for Dune, also did Rogue One.
Matt, I need to stop you because, I was so surprised that you didn't say Star Wars or like one of the Star Wars movies, or like in my mind, I had like A New Hope, like that landscape shot. Like I thought you were gonna say, I really thought it was gonna be Star Wars, but I'm happy.
But I was thinking about it, and I was. The reason why I chose Rogue One is because obviously like the 1977 Star Wars is obviously dated, and they've gone back and fixed some things, which is controversial in itself. Obviously 1977 Star Wars, whichever version you're watching, is something to behold, but I think it's because so many things have come since that have been inspired by it or taken shots from it, just directly from it, that I think like Rogue One is like a modern, like you see those same Star Destroyers and stuff. You see the Death Star, and it's like the scale of it isn't lost. Like it doesn't feel like it's a model on a blue screen, which the original Star Wars doesn't feel like. The opening shot of A New Hope with the Star Destroyer coming over, like one of the most groundbreaking shots of all time. Also, Empire Strikes Back, that shot where you're at the beginning of the movie where you're in a snow speeder. It's one of the first shots like where that technology was ever used to make it feel like you were flying and doing the thing. George Lucas I've had this argument with people, and I don't care to hear the other side. George Lucas, one of the most influential filmmakers of all time, and a fucking, I don't know, one of the greatest to ever do it. Anyone who disagrees is wrong, and that's how I feel. But Rogue One, I think the cinematography is often overlooked because it was just another one of these Star Wars movies in the new Disney era. and sort of something that was outside of our regular timeline, not timeline, but story. I think it gets overlooked too often. Whereas like when you see those shots of, blowing up the holy city of Jeddah and the way that explosion happens, just everything about it is incredible. So Rogue One would be another one for me. The Green Knight, we brought up a little bit earlier, I think is beautiful. The cinematography is like unreal, and some of the shots they use where things turn into like this I don't even know what you call it, like a tracking cam that goes like in a circle, and by the time you've come back, the scenes are blended so well together that you're seeing like 3 different scenes mapped on top of each other, and the transitions are so seamless that it's, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen that one, Ochi, but Luka, I know you've seen that. Like, I don't know. Part of the one thing anybody coming out of that movie says is it looked really cool, but even though I didn't understand it at first or whatever the case is, it's like, it's a beautiful movie.
I saw it on Luka's recommendation.
Nice. Yeah. I know I'm forgetting some like, I know, Luka, I'm just almost bringing this up because I said I would, but Oblivion is one of those films that I just love visually. Yeah. With Tom Cruise, unfortunately. But
I know, right?
Yeah.
Do you know? Okay, yo, Matt. Do you know what's crazy about Oblivion? Is that I know that I've seen it at least 3 times with you.
Yes.
With you.
Yeah.
And I still can't remember the plot of that movie.
It's yeah. Yeah, I know, because the 3 of us watched it all together at one point. Like
probably, yeah.
Yeah, years ago at this point.
Yeah, I mean that movie's old already. Like
no, I've seen it at Luka's place. I've seen it at your place. I've seen it
okay, one more, just because we brought up watching movies together. On that same trip, Ochi, we watched it's got 2 different names, so Live, Die, Repeat and Edge of Tomorrow. Yeah. Underrated cinematography. That's actually a really beautiful movie, and it's a ridiculous movie. It's really cool sci-fi, but like it's pretty fucking zany. But that movie looked really good as well. And then I think things like Princess Mononoke is just one of those films where the visuals have stuck with me forever, and I don't think, like, I'm obsessed with the aesthetic of that movie.
Okay, since you brought up anime, I mentioned the Magnetic Rose when we were talking about sci-fi. Ochi, you showed me Magnetic Rose.
Yep.
And I remember there was one scene. I don't remember like exactly. I think it was like one of the pan out, like you see the dude floating in like the big space station in the back. When I was like, damn, and you were at the same time like, yo, like that's the scene. Like those are the moments that are like, that movie movie episode was like so visually stunning.
No, because like, yeah, because there's a spoiler, but that ending just encapsulates the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, and the funny thing is like the reason it stands out, or like I think for me at least, or like the reason why I recommended it is because visually I always liked it. And it's because it blends sci-fi, and then it has like the like, I don't know, like the regal or royal, like Renaissance art as well. Mm-hmm. Like it goes between the two, and it's like it's an intimate, grounded story again, so it feels warranted. Mm-hmm. and it works.
And that story, I think, of all media I've ever seen, is one of the ones that blends its soundtrack, its story, and its visuals the best maybe that I've ever seen. Like where the music is so integral and important to the story itself that it's like you can't divide them. I loved that. I've only seen it once. Like I've wanted to rewatch it, but it's so good. Matt, I've recommended it to you. I've recommended it to a bunch of people. Nobody's seen it because
I will write it down this time around.
Yo, that was only the second time I saw it in like, or like ever. So like probably 5 years. It was good. Like upon that rewatch.
Mm-hmm.
One last one, The Fountain, which I think I may have forced you guys to watch at one point with
is that the Hugh Jackman?
Yeah.
Or no, that's
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, that one. Like, I rewatched that movie about a year ago. Wept. Like, I think when I watched it before, it was like, oh, this is a trippy film. You don't know what's going on. But I watched it recently and like really pieced it all together and was like, this is a heartbreaking mess of emotion that I was not equipped to deal with at the time I saw it. But yeah, also a visually stunning film. All that stuff going on with him in the tree and I don't know, really cool. Yeah.
I can't not mention Lord of the Rings. I can't, like,
I tried. I can't.
I almost didn't say it, like, because I can't think of like specific shots, because it doesn't like do the thing that Dune does, for example, where it like lingers on one shot. It's like there's those tracking shots of them running through the beautiful wilderness of New Zealand, being Middle Earth. Like, there's so many visual moments that I love in Lord of the Rings, like the setup of the Battle of Helm's Deep.
What do you define it as though? Because not just like the landscapes, but for me, Lord of the Rings is always the statues and the ruins. It's the most visually, like, when I see stuff like that, I'm like, oh, Lord of the Rings. Like, it's very evocative of, like, I don't know, just like Amon Sur and then Amon Hen, like those areas with like the statues that have collapsed, aged due to time, and they're sort of like mossed over.
In the Fellowship, when they're on the river and they pass the statues of the two like kings, like, oh, like I love that shot. Seeing Minas Tirith for the first time. Minas Tirith is beautiful. The Helm's Deep setup I already mentioned. The battle scenes are visually stunning, like the pan out shot when you see the full army and like the end of in the Return of the King, like unbelievable, where you see like the light coming in, just beautiful. I love so many shots in Lord of the Rings, even though it's not like, I guess it is more visual, because like the parts that I love the most, like the battle scenes and like the running, the adventure scenes, like those are the ones I love, and those are very, very visual, and they hold up. Filmed in 99, still holds up.
Yeah. I also too, I think like the reason why like those statues, even like the big ones, are like feel like, even though it's just like that shot, like they show up for like maybe 30 seconds in the whole movie, but it's like it implies that, like, and Aragorn says like I can't remember what their actually roles were, these two kings, but it just like it builds the world without like hitting you over the head with exposition. And like you could just see like with the ruins and stuff, like the depth of what's happening, I guess. I don't know.
I think music also plays a big part into visuals, ironically, because I remember the music in that scene. And like I remember how the combination of the music and the scene itself makes me feel, like in Dune, even like the Gom Jabbar scene is very visually intense, and it's the music that elevates it, that extra, like it just gives that extra impact. Like when that female voice comes into the soundtrack, like that was one of the most amazing moments I've seen in cinema. Like I loved that scene so much. And like music is so important to visuals. It just enhances everything.
Yeah. I also like Star Wars, just binary sunset. Like you hear that like image. If you want to hear us talk more about music, you can check our episode out on the music of fantasy and sci-fi. But yeah, I think that'll do it for us here today on Lords of Lore. Ochi, thanks for coming.
Yeah, man.
No problem, man. That was fun.
Yeah. Whenever you want to come back, just let us know. As always, I'm Matt.
I'm Luka.
I'm Ochi.
And we have other shows I forgot to mention, but we're also the Lords of Lore.